All right, everybody. Welcome. I'm Sage Rader, and I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Kamau Kokayi today. Dr. Kamau, how are you?
I'm good. Grand rising this morning. All right.
Right. So, while we get started, you and I know each other's background. We have a close friendship and relationship, but I'd like it if you could just tell everybody briefly who you are, what you do, and how we got together. And what we want to talk about a little bit today is consciousness as a baseline. But I want you to introduce yourself first, please, if you would.
Hi. So I'm actually a physician, and um, I've had to move in different directions just because of the unique situation of being an African American here in this country. Um, I'm someone that's gone to all Ivy League schools. I was a college scholar at Cornell. Um, I went to Yale Medical School. I turned down full scholarship for law, and I got into Harvard as well. But and it all sounds good, but let me frame it a little bit differently. In high school, I was bussed in to a basically a predominantly white high school, and subject to a whole lot of racial taunts and insults. My good friend, my best friend at the time, Ruben, who went on to help design the stealth bomber in engineering. But at the time, he started a branch of the Black Panther Party. This is out in East Meadow, Long Island. And it kind of brought more into my awareness the actual conflict that was going on. Because I came from a middle class background, and it was basically about sports and academics, going to basement parties on the weekend. And I wasn't really thinking so much about the racial piece, although it was right there in my face. And that really created a lot of turmoil within me. So when I got to Cornell, I got in a college scholar program. So I had one advisor who was African American in the Department of Psychology, and another advisor who was a Nobel Prize winning chemist. So on the one hand, as a college scholar, I didn't have to declare a major. So I kind of crafted this program that would help me to get into a variety of postgraduate programs. But at the same time, I also was dealing with I was also dealing with my racial identity and what had happened to Black people in this country. And I remember I started a Black newspaper, which ran for 20 years after I left, more than 20 years. And I remember a telling moment when I was negotiating with the school on whether the newspaper would be a part of the general newspaper or be separate. And I clearly decided it should be separate so I could have more control. And that became a big lesson for me. Um, so anyway, then I went to medical school. And while I was trying to decide what to do, and I was in Africa over the summer, I lost my placement at Harvard because I didn't respond. And my mother just said, yeah, he's coming when Yale had called her. But what I was struggling with, my mentor and professor at the time, Professor James Turner, actually, I said, well, what are Black people supposed to do here? Because we're constantly under assault. Um, this the way the system is set up, it doesn't really look at our maybe style in terms of our cognition and how we take things in. So I had to decide, did I want to be this revolutionary person, or did I want to be a spiritual person? And that was the two, because I'm not going to be the person that's out there marching. That just wasn't my energy. So I said, let me go to medical school. I didn't see myself as an attorney because they'll just change the law. So you go to medical school, same racial taunts. I remember being in an ethics class, and one white person jumps up and says, he reminds us. I'm like, so I was already the other
Mm.
constantly. And after a certain point of all the politicization that I had at Cornell, we were involved with building takeovers, march. I mean, it just went on and on. I'm like, this is so much conflict. So in medical school, I realized this civil rights and everything, this isn't my problem. This is like the majority culture that's had to rely on a whole racial platform to get this society going, and has had to tell themselves lies about who they are and what I am, that there's a problem here. And more than that, I'm in a place that we're supposed to be learning how to heal people. So in my mind, God would not put all the answers here because there's a profound limitation in consciousness. It always came back to who the person is. I mean, because this is not all people, obviously, but institutionally, the consciousness that's instilled in these institutions is designed to put limitations on how people see themselves and how people see other people. Now, both Black and white people get that message, and to their own detriment. So for me, I had to take some space, and I was looking for things like, what direction do I go in? And I remember I had a really phenomenal memory at the time. So I was not stressed by medical school. My my Black advisor at Cornell said, don't go to medical school, it's a glorified mechanic. And I began to realize that as I was in school. So, and at the time, I'm there at Yale. I'm chairman of education of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, right? This is an organization started by Stokely Carmichael. And I realized that the community is not interested in all this kind of intellectual historical information that we had. So I said, this doesn't make any sense. So what happened at a certain point in my first couple of months there, I left school, right? I told my parents that I didn't know if I could go back. Now, here is their son that gets into Yale Medical School. You know, this is in the late 70s, right? So that would be considered a big deal. And yet I'm like totally flustered. This doesn't make any sense what I'm doing in terms of how they want me to function. So my parents had a fit. My father, who was actually a politician, right, and a general in the army, right? It's like, are you going to be out here with a Tommy gun? What you going to be doing? I was crazy. My mother was crying because her grandfather could have gone, her father could have gone to medical school, but just all the racial stuff that didn't happen. So I said, look, I'm going to go back, but I'm going to take a year off after I pass part one of my boards, and I'm going to go to Okinawa and practice martial arts. That had been my outlet in school, right? But life didn't have it that way. So what happened, I was on the wards, and there was a man that said that he was going to die that day. He had had a heart attack a few days ago. And just in conversation, he says, I'm going to die today. I said, hey, you're all right, you know. And then I went, I went about my business during the day. I'm on the wards. I'm just a student. I come back to him and I start talking to him, and he looks at me and we're like close, like I'm close to the screen. And he says, I'm gone. And that man was gone. I mean, so it was a whole code. I had to step back. It's like, what did I witness? Like, where did this guy go? you know? So I started scratching my head. And then I had a couple of other things happen to me. I pulled out this book called Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. And I was so fascinated by the otherworld reality that he created, a reality that was right here, but it's in front of you, but we don't digest it. It's a different mindset and consciousness in terms of how you take things in. Now, mind you, I'm already like struggling, at school because I can't really relate to the whole reality. And just to let you know how polarized I was at the point, my thesis advisor, who was a Black orthopedic doctor, he was married to a white woman. And that was offensive to me, right? That he would do that. And again, it was because of my framework at the time. Like, how do you do that? That's like the oppressor, whatever. But anyway, I had to take a year. I had to get out of there because my my energy was not going to fit into that kind of academic environment. So what happened, I got involved with African culture, just a series of things, of lectures. I took that year off and I moved to Harlem and I began to study metaphysics. I began to study homeopathy, herbalism, Chinese medicine. And I began to see that there were other platforms that you could begin to invest in that would help you both appreciate the world and healing. So this totally shifted my consciousness. And the other thing that was important, this is the late 70s. So you had books like The Tao of Physics by Fridolf Capra, Dancing Woolly Masters and stuff, where there was an understanding that physics was shifting so that now we're talking about a quantum mechanics in which consciousness, right, you become a co-creator. You're both the creator and created, right? And depending on what aspect or how you're vibrating, your level of consciousness, you can choose to participate in this, not as a victim, but as a co-creator of the reality that you want to have. So the transformation was so great for me being in African culture that it was no longer a thing about looking down or hating folks or whatever that really hated you or were willing just to put their foot on you and not think about it, because I realized this is a level of consciousness and this is really a training ground. And in African culture, we spend a lot of time going into trance states, going into altered states of consciousness that allow you to get a wider view of what's actually going on. And I remember I had a naming ceremony for one of my children, and there was a priestess that was there, and she went into trance, right? And she started talking about how, you know, this was just a training ground. This is not the ultimate reality, you know, that there's something more that's out here. And we are just here to do our time, right? To understand whatever lessons we have and to share whatever gifts. And it's been so much easier to approach the world in that way because everybody got their own story. Nobody gets off here because that's not the point of being here. So once you get past your own personal story, you can begin to embrace the spirit, you know, of what's actually here. And it just changes the world and opens the world up for you. So I went back to Yale, wrote my thesis on physics, right? In fact, I just had contact with my thesis advisor from 40 years ago, who said he used a lot of our meetings. He quoted in some of his books and things because, you know, I was transformed during that year away. I got grounded. You can say I took a year off from the melee that I was in, and it really helped to just refocus and recenter me, you know, so that I spent so much time in my last year in medical school. I did a rotation in homeopathy. I was in the stacks in the library looking at all the references around Chinese medicine, nutritional things. I was already a vegan at that time. So it was just transformational. And I never looked back. So, and once you like are guided by your own intuition and, you know, the consciousness that you can hold on to, it's like a red carpet that just unfolds. And you just have to walk the walk and just take things as they come. So that's a little bit of my story in a
All
nutshell.
right. Wow. That is a perfect capsule. We're going to end right here. We're going to pick it right up with the next conversation. Thank you guys for watching. Dr. Kamau Kokayi, Western MD, Eastern educated, thrice initiated into different African traditions as a priest, and my good friend. Thank you for sharing. That's powerful. The way you've made it through cultural barriers, racial barriers, intellectual barriers. You have been pioneering and like an icebreaker, cutting through the thickness of social BS for a very long time. So I want to thank you. We'll be right back. Everyone else, please check out number 2, because that's coming right up. We're going to talk a little bit more about what Dr. Kokayi has learned about consciousness, what the Western, Eastern, and shamanic traditions have to do in his experience with breath, and how neuroacrobatics, what I've created, Kamau actually took my course, so we have something to talk about breath and brain and body. So we're going to do that in a couple other segments. Please come back. We'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us. Bye.